You know, it's kind of funny. This was originally supposed to be the subject of review number 150, but with my then recent acquisition of Studio Series Overload, I decided to bump it all the way back to 160 to make room for Devastator. At the time, I didn't think it would have been as big a setback as it was. The important thing is I'm finally at the end of the backlog I picked out all the way back in October, and from now on I'm not picking out 10 reviews at a time anymore. I'm moving down to 5. It'll give me less burnout. Welcome to Kit Reviews. My name is Kit, and today we'll be taking a look at Transformers Universe SWERVE. This figure was released in 2008 as... well, it's really complicated. The Transformers Wiki has a pretty succinct summary of the situation, so check that out if you're still out of the loop. As his affectionate nickname of AVEO SWERVE suggests, SWERVE transforms into a fully licensed candy red Chevrolet AVEO, quite possibly one of the most mundane and unremarkable cars I've ever laid eyes on. Not to say that's a bad thing, considering robots in disguise is the whole point. This is one of the largest deluxe class-ish vehicles I've had on the show in quite a long time, and could probably fit in well enough within a Bayformers collection, at least if you have enough 2007 and Revenge of the Fallen figures lying around. This could have been the cliff jumper to Bumblebee's Bumblebee. Since this was back in the middle of the previous golden age of Transformers, there's actually a shit ton of painted detail that doesn't get left out to dry in this sea of red plastic. The grille is coated with on-topic silver and black, and the headlights are molded separately from the front end in a translucent blue plastic. The Chevrolet badge is even picked out in metallic gold, both of them. Even the taillights are painted with separately colored brake and signal lights. Even all 4 door handles are picked out in silver, and the window frames are rimmed with black. This is a kind of attention to detail that we just don't see anymore. Though, considering this wasn't exactly released at general retail, maybe I'm being a little too overzealous. There's an Autobot symbol on the hood, but you probably wouldn't notice it at first because it's in a red just barely darker than that of the body of the car itself. I know he's a robot in disguise, but this is ridiculous. SWERVE's vehicle mode is actually extremely solid, with tons upon tons of locking tabs and slots to keep the AVEO from bursting apart at the seams. Once everything is free to move as you please, you'll find that SWERVE's transformation comes at the crossroads between the outgoing Classics and Cybertron style of simplicity and the incoming Bayverse influences of complexity and dynamism. The way the legs wrap inwards around themselves is a move you'd expect to find on a movie figure, but the solidity of the boots it forms is definitely more in line with Classics. Everything above the waist is substantially less experimental, with a somewhat eyebrow-raising elbow lock, a rote waist swivel, and the entire hood of the car forming the chest in a very familiar fashion. AVEO SWERVE is a bot all his own, and his transformation shows it. AVEO SWERVE is a bot with no identity, a man with no home, a countryman with no people, and a soul with no respite. As a one-off Transformers figure designed as a goodwill present, SWERVE doesn't really fit in anywhere or with anybody. I mean, I keep him on my dresser, hanging out with my third-party and Kamen Rider stuff, but that's besides the point. Too detailed to fit in amongst the likes of Power Glide and Drop Shot, and too blocky to look right next to Dropkick and Landmine, SWERVE strikes it out all on his lonesome, and that's okay. Strangely, he does pass more than a slight resemblance to famous Bayverse Decepticon Swindle from just a year before, what with the hood chest and door pauldrons, and you'd be forgiven to think there was some influence between the two. And you'd be right, since the same man, Alex Kubalski, was involved in the design of both Swindle and SWERVE. Of course, Swindle's design came first, so it seems his CNA has made its mark on this mold. For the record, Kubalski didn't design Swindle from scratch, but merely adapted his video game design into toy form. SWERVE, on the other hand, was all him as far as I know. Onto the figure itself, SWERVE's proportions really do it for me. He's very stocky, but more in an implied muscular way. The front tires help this aesthetic along, as they're skewed slightly to be more dynamic and to imply a sort of kinetic connective tissue. The legs are kind of kibbly, as the rear window was just jutting off his kneecaps, but fortunately they don't get in the way of anything while posing, and neither do the doors on his shoulders. From the back, SWERVE is surprisingly clean and slim, with the windshield serving as a window to his spine. Let's hope that glass is bulletproof. The head sculpt is what makes things clear that SWERVE is just a name slap with no real connection to the original character or any of his other incarnations, though that's not saying much since this was before people actually gave a shit about SWERVE. as the sculpt is incredibly generic based on the Autobot symbol. That kinda renders the brand on his chest a little redundant, but it's not like you could see it anyway. Swerve's head is on a ball joint that is actually kind of limited because it has this collar around the back that kind of gets in the way of a lot of more subtle ranges of motion. He can look up pretty nicely, he can look down a bit. In that case, his chin kind of tucks into his chest a little, and he can rotate his head side to side, but because of this collar and because of this chest piece here, it's always sort of at an angle. There's also like a slight hinge at the neck as well that allows his head to sort of bob a little, but it's very slight and very subtle. As you can see, it doesn't really do much. These shoulders are on ball joints that rotate 360 degrees and go about this far outward until the door hits the torso, which is actually really good. That's pretty much 180 degrees across. There's nothing at the bicep because it has this transformation joint that locks in the bicep, and I don't really see where there would be space to cut one in. The elbow bends less than 90 degrees, which is kind of a shame, but you can use that transformation joint to get a nice double elbow out of it, and the wrist rotates very nicely, actually. The waist rotates 360 degrees because it's for transformation, though one thing I don't like about this figure is that the chest kind of moves up and down on its own. There's no way to really lock it in place, so if you're moving his arms, you'll notice the chest kind of bobs along with it as well. The hips are on ball joints that can move forward and backwards and outwards pretty nicely, but there are no thigh swivels in the actual thigh, and there is actually room to cut one, but it's just hollow in there, so there's really no thigh swivel. It's just what you get out of these ball joints. The knees bend a very great deal, and with the size of these boots, you actually get something out of it. Like, it's not perfect, the thigh to calf ratio, but it is very nice, and you can get him into a kneeling pose if you really work his joints. There is an ankle pivot that goes more outwards than inwards, so it's not really that helpful, but this joint right here for the transformation, it does allow for an even greater bend, though obviously this looks a little unnatural, so I wouldn't really suggest using it. So Swerve, he's posable. He's more posable than most figures were back in his time, but in terms of today, he has a few things left to be desired. To be perfectly clear, AVEO Swerve is not a stellar figure. There's really nothing here, engineering-wise at least, to warrant getting this guy. He's a run-of-the-mill Autobot car former with no really neat tricks and somewhat limited articulation, and if that turns you off, you probably won't find much enjoyment with this guy. The biggest reason people buy AVEO Swerve is for the prestige. It's not exactly the easiest figure to get, and the best way to make someone want something is to tell them they can't have it. That's not to say he'll cost you an arm and a leg, far from it. I got mine for under $25 with his instructions, and I've seen multiple others go for a similar price, at least on Transformerland. It's just, he doesn't show up often, mind you. I'll admit, that prestige does feel a little good, and he was definitely worth the price. Looking at him a little more objectively, I'd say a rating of adequate is fair, since that's just what he is in my eyes. If you liked this video or otherwise found it helpful or informative, then please subscribe for more reviews like this in the future, and feel free to suggest topics for future reviews in the comments. When we return, we'll be taking a look at one of the coolest cats to be released in Selects. This has been Kit Katastrophe. Transform and roll out.